Hey there, listeners. Thank you for tuning in again to Tokyo Wave. We don't have a new episode for you this week, but we are starting a new series on Tokyo Wave called Tokyo Wave Rewind, where we go back to some of our more interesting guest interviews, giving you a chance to listen to an interview you might not have heard of or experience it again. Today we have Matt Ketchum. Akiya Hunter, black metal musician, and real estate consultant Matt Ketchum tells us about his experience escaping from a 38-meter tall tsunami on March 11th, 2011, and his passion for cataloging Japan's infamous glut of abandoned houses. Tokyo Wave Rewinds.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us today on Tokyo Wave.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
So, a little bit about Matt. Matt is known as the Akiya Hunter. He's a real estate marketer, event producer, and consultant. Originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Matt moved to Japan in 2009 after graduating from Hobart and William Smith colleges to teach English in Miyako, a small port town in rural Iwate. Matt was enamored with Inaka life, but then, on March 11th, 2011 at 2:46 p.m., all of that was washed away by a 37-meter tsunami, and he was left standing outside of a hilltop temple, homeless, watching the city burn. After 2 months of organizing response teams in Miyako, Matt moved to Tokyo to work with art galleries and NPOs active in Tohoku in the reconstruction effort. Fast forward through a diverse career spanning market research, consulting, and most recently serving as executive director of a chamber of commerce in Japan, you could say Matt is a jack of all trades and a master of fun. Underlying all of that, Matt has relentlessly pursued his passion for independent, boundary-pushing music as a guitarist for black metal bands Dark Corpse, Wretch, and now Worship Pain. He is also a respected booker and tour manager, and a data-hungry documentarian cataloging and analyzing the physical history of Japan's rich underground music culture. This underground metal methodology Matt has recently begun applying to the Akiya market, which has culminated in the genesis of his new venture, Akiya and Inaka.
Wow, so Matt, I think this is our first time really meeting and talking, listening to your background. Is it true that when the tsunami hit, the area that you were living in was actually washed away?
Yeah, I mean, there was remnants of stuff, but, it was pretty well devastated. I have an official document from the Japanese government called a Risai Shomeisho that says, oh, yeah, that was totally, you got wrecked, brah.
Wow.
Yeah. And let me clarify, too, because it's kind of funny when you talk about tsunamis, you don't usually think about things on fire. So I was on the bay, and across the bay was the industrial town, and there were a lot of gas, like gas lines and manufacturers over there. Mm-hmm. And so those lit on fire. So it was a very kind of like strange juxtaposition of everything got wrecked by a tsunami, which is water, but now it's on fire.
Jeez, man, I can't even imagine that. It must have felt like the end of the world.
Yeah, it did.
Wow.
Well, and so, if I'm not mistaken, Miyako and Iwate was one of the worst hit areas by the tsunami.
Yes.
I think it got one of the tallest waves, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm pretty sure it was the tallest wave, and that was in a specific area of Miyako, which is a very large municipality, but there's a village within it called Taro, and that was, I think it was 36.9 meters that was registered. Look it up on Wikipedia. I know it's on there.
Jeez, man, but anything over 30 meters is just...
40 meters base rounding up is just, you can't, how big is that? What does that mean?
What's the difference at that point, right? Yeah.
No, we even found like cars and trees and stuff. It was really surreal.
Well, I remember a few years ago, you said something to me that I'll never forget, and that was that you evacuated very quickly, but you actually almost got caught by the tsunami because you had to go back to your apartment.
Yeah. So it was a very good learning experience, let's say. So we're running away, and I was with my landlords, a married couple, and their little dog John, which is an incredibly common name for a Japanese dog. Kind of a side note there. But anyway, as we're running away, Kazuko was her name. As we're running, she was like, "Oh, did you get your passport?" And of course I didn't.
Oh, wow.
So I ran back to get my passport. And the learning experience is that because I was in my apartment, it's like, oh, let's get other stuff. And you grab the stupidest shit when you're in like full on disaster panic mode. So I got my wallet, I got my Motorhead bag, which is very important. I grabbed a dead iPod, and I also did not get a charger or headphones. And like a bunch of other basically useless shit. And I totally didn't get like a coat or anything that I could really use. And so, yeah, I learned that you need to be very kind of cautious and aware of what you're getting in times of disaster. Because if you're not careful, you'll just grab a bunch of useless stuff.
For sure. Yeah. I always have my laptop in mind, but I can imagine during, the actual disaster, I don't know, I might grab a bottle of water and really
I didn't do any of these things.
Wow. And then after that, you helped with the actual cleanup effort and kind of restoration, or?
Yeah, so for about 2 months, because, we were, like, legit, we could not leave. There was too much rubble. And
wow.
The first day, the neighborhood that I lived in was called Koganji. And so the first 3 days, there was so much rubble that I couldn't even leave Koganji. So we were just on top of, I was camped out in a Buddhist temple. And so we couldn't leave, right? And so many things happened there. Like it was weird how every morning for the first 3 days, despite the fact that it's a disaster, the Buddhist monks were still practicing their stuff. So we'd wake up at 8 a.m. with, like the rituals and the gongs and the music and stuff. I also remember I had maybe 5 like square blocks that I could explore. I remember just kind of surveying the damage, and I came across this one much older gentleman who was digging through rubble for something, and he kind of gestured at me to come over, and he wanted some help. And so I was like, all right, whatever. And he was really trying to open this one drawer. And I was like, dude, why don't you just like get a rock? Like your house is wrecked. Like, it's not like it matters anymore. So I just picked up this big boulder and smashed the damn thing open. And there was his life savings. I don't know how much it was, but it was just a big box of 10,000 yen bills. And it was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm very glad that I could help you get that.
Wow.
The first day you're just in shock, so you don't really think about what's going to happen in the future. You're just like, oh, okay, I'm here. The second day is when panic totally sets in, and you're like, holy shit, everything's gone. How much money is that? How do I get that back? Can I even leave? And you really, that's definitely an existential crisis. But then, and fittingly, right, I was at this Buddhist temple, and I do distinctly remember, coming to terms with not having anything and being like, that was just a bunch of suits and a computer, and I could buy those things again. It's not like any of them really mattered. So that was actually, and I think I still sort of have that kind of approach to things these days, is that there's only so many things that matter and don't accumulate too much.
Right on. Yeah, I know the whole minimalist mindset. I hear a lot of foreigners that live in Japan that end up adopting that.
Yeah, totally. I 100% have adopted that.
Wow. So, after all this, how long did you stay up in that area before eventually coming down here to Tokyo?
I think I left May 15th or something like that. I actually don't remember the date, so it might have been before that, but it was a good chunk of time. I was homeless, so I ended up living out. So the first 3 days I was living at this Buddhist temple, and then somebody cleared the wreckage. I don't know how that happened to this day, but because it was like walls of garbage. Somebody cleared that, and so I went scavenging for food because I was with 20 or so other people in this temple. And so I went kind of towards the center of town, and that took me 4 hours to get there, what was normally maybe a 40-minute walk, because, it was literally up to my waist in just muck. And there was definitely like this Wizard of Oz like second story of a house that's just miraculously in the middle of the street. How did that get there, and where did it come from?
Oh my gosh!
So I had to crawl over that.
Wow.
And so eventually I get to the center of town. I go to the first Lawson, like everybody else did. That I see, there's a huge line outside, and actually some of my students were in line, and they were the ones so I taught in Taro, the place. In fact, I was supposed to be in Taro on the day of the tsunami, where the 39 meter, like I was supposed to be there. The night before, I got a phone call saying, hey, you know what, just take a day off.
Wow.
Right. And so I get to the Lawson, and there's two of my students from Taro there, and I'm like, holy shit, you're alive. Okay, what's up? And I remember I distinctly remember asking them, like, how's Taro? And they just responded, Mo night. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? Like, how can it not be there? And sure enough, like 2 weeks later, I ended up going with an Irish news crew of all things. And it was legit gone. Like, the only thing that remained was one convenience store sign standing up in the middle of just a field of wreckage and rubble. It looked like it was bombed, right? Yeah, so that happened, and then as I was walking back, there was another tsunami alarm. And fortunately enough, I was near my good friend Seiji's house. He's kind of like a senpai character, and just, luckily enough, he was walking by and was like, holy shit, you're still fucking alive? Get over to my house right now. You're staying here. And I was like, no, I gotta go take the food back to the temple. And he was like, you can do that later.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. And so from that point on, I was living out of Seiji's house with another 10 or so people, or I think it was 7. And every day, just like a job, we'd wake up at 7 a.m., grab a shovel, put on a dirt suit, and just literally go out into the city and like shovel shit, right? And we worked in houses, we worked at boutique, stores, restaurants, izakaya. We cleaned everything, really, and that lasted like a month and a half, 2 months, something like that.
Wow.
And then I went to Tokyo. And even that was a story. Should I tell that part too, or is this too much about the tsunami?
No. I mean, first off, just so much respect. I feel like if a tsunami hit here,
you'd all be fucked. I have no doubt in my mind that everybody in Tokyo would just like fall over and cry.
I just feel like I maybe I shouldn't say this. I don't know how motivated I would be to wake up every morning at 7 a.m. and help to clean up the city afterwards if I survived. Well,
I mean, I don't even think you'd be able to know what you'd be like then, because it's not a regular occurrence. It's not like I have to do this thing. It's like, everything has changed.
Yep. Yeah. That's why, side note, that's one reason why I really liked fixed gear bikes, is because in the event of a huge natural disaster, the one thing, the most reliable form of like transportation that you can have is a fixed gear bike, right? It's not a car. They require gas and maintenance. It's definitely not trains. It's totally not airplanes and stuff. If you've got a fixed gear bike, those things are really, really strong and will not they can break, but of all the things that could break, that's the last one too. And so it's always in the back of my head. It's not that, I just like fixies. It's, I in fact, during the tsunami, this is where it comes from. I had a really kick-ass bike. And that's another one of the fucking things that I didn't take with me. And it got washed away.
Man.
But yeah, I guess, so the whole story, right? I was there for like a month and a half, 2 months, doing all this cleanup work and stuff, which was really just like emotionally draining. I can't describe it. But then the company that I was working for at the time, like, it was so bad. Like, we had a 10-day blackout, like no phones, no internet, no nothing. My parents were freaking out. Somehow an ex-girlfriend discovered that I was alive and communicated and found my parents on Facebook and told them that, which was still like, wow, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I still have, I have the email saved that she sent to my parents.
Wow.
So, I've confirmed that Matt's alive. I want you to know this. And she was in Tokyo, too. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's weird. And so I did that for a while. And then the company that I was with, I won't say their name, just whatever, so far as I can tell, they determined that I was alive, like my parents. And once they found this out, they were like, holy shit, get down to Tokyo now. Like, you're in a disaster zone. You're still alive. This is insane. Please get out of there. And so that's actually how the impetus that I had to leave Tokyo was to come, like, basically start working again and stuff. But it was almost like God or whatever, Kami-sama or whatnot, like really trying to make me not leave Miyako, because we have kind of like our last meal together in Miyako, like a big party and stuff, and then around 10 p.m. or so, I had a night bus ticket from Morioka to Tokyo. And so I get driven to Morioka, and then I'm staying like at the train station waiting for the bus, get on the bus. You know, we start driving, I fall asleep, kind of, but not like a deep sleep. And after like an hour or so, I notice like, wait a minute, we're not moving. What's up? And I kind of like, you know, ask around. They're like, oh, wait, no, there was an aftershock and the road broke again, so we have to go back to Morioka.
Oh my gosh,
and
man.
this is like 2 or 3 a.m., right? And it's, keep in mind, this is March in Tohoku, so it's still cold, it's still snowy and all this stuff, right? And so the weirdest thing happened. I have no clue. There's been a lot of serendipity, I think, in my life. This might be the biggest one. Is that I get back to Morioka and I'm just like, okay, fuck, what, do I sleep on the street in the middle of winter? Like, what? Oh, and it was blacked out too, and it was a clear night, so there's the super, really kind of splendorous kind of silhouette of the city behind like a cold, clear, moonlit sky, which was quite nice. And so I get back to the station and I'm just like, all right, well, once again, I'm fucked. All right, I guess I'm just going to do whatever. And like 10 minutes later, I get a phone call from my drunk friend in Morioka being like, yo, dude, I'm near the station and I got 2 bottles of tequila. Like, what are you up to? And I was like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, I guess we're doing this. And so, and all the other people, because it was a bus full of people, right? And they all disperse, and I'm the last one just like waiting at this lonely, empty metropolitan station in the middle of winter in a disaster. And I can distinctly hear like the clink of the bottles in his backpack before I see him. I'm like, oh, okay, it's like in the war years, you know? Yeah. And so he comes to the fucking station, picks me up, and he's like, oh, I guess you'll just stay at my place. And so, but it's like a 40-minute walk, and so we're walking back to his place, and it's like 4 a.m. or something, and we're drinking and walking, but then we come across this river with some nice rocks, and we just sit on the river, on the rocks, drinking shitty bottled tequila, watching the sunrise during a disaster.
Jeez, wow.
Yeah. Romantic.
That was a weird, that
could be a commercial. Jose Cuervo.
Yeah, right.
When you really need to not give a shit about anything.
Nothing matters, Jose, except Jose.
At least you can expect the sunrise.
So, eventually I finally made it to Tokyo.
Wait, you had an actual tequila sunrise?
Yeah.
That's probably a very rare experience in the tequila world.
Gin, actually.
Okay.
We had 2 bottles. One was, and it was cold outside, but the liquor was definitely not cold.
Wow.
Or good, but we kept drinking it anyway.
Well, I mean, it was May though, so it was cold, but it wasn't like snow. It was,
maybe it was probably April, now that I'm thinking about it. Right. So, like 5 weeks or so I spent in Miyako post-tsunami, and then made my way down to Tokyo.
So when you finally get to Tokyo, what are you met with?
That's actually a really good question, because coming from such an extreme environment, I only have like kind of so many memories of first arriving in Tokyo. In fact, the only one that I can really think of is my good friend down here, Kazuma, who is the best friend of the guy up in Miyako, Seiji, who's kind of my senpai, who I hadn't met either previously. And Seiji just made a call and was like, yo, Kazuma, my boy's coming down. You're going to help him find an apartment. Right. And so I stayed with them for like 2 weeks or so, and they finally we found an apartment, and I'm still good friends with them to this day. But that's honestly like the only kind of memory I can think of during the first, month or whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure after all the chaos, like coming to a more calm, well, not calm, but, more regular Tokyo.
Well, it's funny because I was here for 3/11, and so I remember Tokyo, on the day of and immediately afterwards. And for really the kind of 6 months or so after 3/11, Tokyo was very different, but to someone coming from Miyako, it must have just been like, oh, this is business as usual.
Yeah, I think that's maybe why I don't have any memories, is because it just seemed super mundane.
Do you remember people in Tokyo being like super skittish and paranoid and thinking, God, these guys are a bunch of wusses?
Yes, totally.
So I remember, in Tokyo after 3/11, everyone was super paranoid about, there was the whole Fly-Gene thing, and, people were like evacuating from Tokyo because of the quote unquote, nuclear cover up, et cetera, and it was a big thing. And I just remembered because I had been up to Iwate before the tsunami and I knew how bad it was. I'm thinking, God, these guys don't even understand.
Yeah, no,
Nothing's really happening in Tokyo. It's just a bunch of paranoia.
Right. It's completely separate types of experience. I don't think, no matter how much I explain it would be very difficult, I think, to kind of communicate the full kind of experience of everything that happened there.
If 3/11 taught me anything, it was about the whole idea of government communications. And I think that the Japanese government and maybe even other governments as well learned a thing or two about how to communicate after such a huge disaster. Not because they did a really good job, but because they did a pretty bad job and there were pretty serious consequences.
For me, there's a lot of takeaways from it, but something that's exceedingly important in my mind is like spontaneous organization. Just across the board, the people of Miyako like banded together immediately. Everybody was in it together. Everybody was helping each other out. There were no boundaries or borders or anything. And I don't think there was even one case of looting there. It was just everybody helping each other out. And so, like, it is kind of a strange sort of feeling that amidst a huge fucking tsunami that wrecked everything and killed 2,000 people, there's like some just the best example of like humanity, right? And like that's something I'll never forget, and that's something that like I really do in my own way kind of try to implement in most, if not everything, that I do henceforth, right?
Yeah, I do think that something similar happened over here as well in Tokyo, and it was that sense that, of course, there were some instances of people taking advantage of the situation or people being inconsiderate in the face of the crisis situation, but there were also a lot of instances of people helping each other and people coming to the aid of others in their time of need that really, I think for those of us who experienced 3/11 in Japan and stayed, I think it was really a positive experience in that, wow, this country is awesome. These people really, it was really just, you felt that the sense of community and the sense of people are generally good-hearted and want to help each other. That whoever was that philosopher, was it Kant?
It may have been.
But it's most of the time I think he was wrong, but in that instance, he sounded pretty accurate, It only works in Japan. Otherwise, people are terrible and want to kill each other and take each other's money.
Yeah. You brought up something really interesting. I think you said the ability to radically or organize very quickly.
Spontaneous organization.
I came here right after 3/11, and I was inundated with, this is the disaster zone for this. This is where you go for this. It was almost like weekly training.
Oh, right.
When I was at this Japanese language school, there were people would come in, and it was probably because it was just after the earthquake. But really, I was like, oh, wow, like everyone's like really community oriented, wants to take care of everyone. And they had like stockpiles of food.
Yep.
Like, this is how much food we have for, this can feed like 300 people. If we run out, we can get it from this. They had like all these plans within plans.
Yeah. That they could just rely on.
The States is just like,
what plan? You thought we had a plan? Who told you to think that?
So I guess another question is, what led you to start looking into Akiya or abandoned houses?
That's a very good question. So for a long time now, this is actually a weird story. For a long time, probably 5 or 6 years at this point, I've been documenting Japan's underground extreme metal ecosystem, which sounds like it's totally not at all related to abandoned houses. By doing the work that I've done with musicians and venues and whatnot, we kind of developed sort of a methodology for casing and documenting and kind of analyzing any given ecosystem, be it underground rock and roll, be it whatever. And so, what was it, like 2015 or so? When the articles about, oh my God, free houses in Japan, the clickbaity stuff started coming out, I, like probably everybody else, was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Read the articles and whatnot. But after reading a few of them, I noticed that, they're all basically throwing around the same numbers. There's this miraculous, I think it's 8 million is the number that frequently gets cited about how many of these abandoned houses there are across Japan. And being a documentarian, I'm thinking like, okay, you have no citations. Like, I don't know where's this number coming from? Everybody's repeating it, but nobody's saying like why it's accurate or real.
Well, it's like the McDonald's sign, billions and billions served.
Right. And so that kind of stuff
it on the sign.
That kind of stuff irks me. Like, I just don't like bad data, right? And so me being the curious person that I am, I tried to look. I basically figured out, okay, where are these properties being documented? And it turns out that they're online, but they're just terribly governed. The ecosystem is completely fractured, and it's honestly no surprise at all that these houses, and it's not just houses, it's restaurants, it's office space, it's izakaya, it's, whatever type of building there is, you can find an abandoned one of it in Japan. And so that's really just kind of how I started, is merely tracking down, basically being like a detective, and tracking down various data points regarding these properties, and then, sorting them and cleaning it and kind of coming to conclusions about what the entire landscape looks like.
Right. And as you mentioned, about like 5-6 years ago, myself, I got so many messages on Facebook from friends in the States, and they're like, Aaron, you could buy a house for $1,000. And they would send me these really dubious websites, and the Japanese was all weird. And having worked in real estate, I'm like, this is too good to be true. So maybe could you shed some light on or help debunk some of the misconceptions there are with these properties?
Yeah, sure. Number one, that 8 million number, like, do not rely on that one. Even myself, like, I can give you a really big ballpark estimate of what I think maybe the amount of these abandoned buildings are, or vacant buildings, as I'd like to say. But honestly, it's such a ballpark figure that it's meaningless. There's a lot. The free thing is, well, let's say it like this, if they are free, they're the worst, and you wouldn't want it. Right. And that's another thing, too, is like, I don't bother with properties that like aren't viable. And I would say there's probably about 80 to 85% of all the listings, and not all of them are listed either. Right. But probably like 80 to 85% or so are crap. Like, they should be liquidated. But that's the thing, is that the data is just so dirty and so fractured that up until, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but up until kind of what I've been doing and documenting them, it is next to impossible to sort through all the information to find something that you're actually interested in, right? The kind of price point varies widely. In fact, there's one that I discovered the other day. It's kind of like Thoreau would probably be really. It's just like a wooden, it's a forest, one-room cabin kind of thing, which is what I'm interested in. I like that stuff. That's not everybody's cup of tea. That one's listed for 800,000 yen, which is like, what, $7,500. So like,
wow.
they do get cheap. I need to check that one out, though. It looks good, but I haven't yet been there. Which is actually something that we also are starting to offer potential clients that we're working with. With another client that we're working with, we're taking them out to Nagano. Well, actually, tomorrow. That one's listed, it's 1.2 mil, isn't it?
1.8.
1.8? Okay. And so that's, what, like $17,000 or so?
Wow.
The one that we just visited up in Sano City in Tochigi Prefecture is listed at 42.8, right? So that's, call it $500,000. So really, it depends on a lot of stuff. So it's very difficult to say like, oh, abandoned or vacant houses in Japan are $100,000. Which one? Right?
Let me ask, so if the prices are this cheap though, is there like an instantaneous amount of fees that you have to pay right after you buy it?
That's actually something that we're working on streamlining, right? And again, that depends on the municipality, the owner. Sometimes, yes, it can happen, but also sometimes no, right?
Yeah, that was my biggest assumption when I saw the cheap prices. Like my gut instinct told me, if it's 7,000 USD, I probably have to pay $1 million in fees or something, right?
No, and so it's really funny. And so actually on this Akiya and Inaka, Matt and I have partnered up together to work on this kind of new platform, so to speak. And the thing that got me really interested in it is from a real estate perspective, it's this sort of too good to be true self-discouraging prophecy. And so usually when you're looking at property, and especially if you're a foreign national here in Japan, you're usually looking at property in a metropolitan area. And a lot of the people who have lived here for a long time, more than 5 years, who have ever bought or looked at property or even renting property, the market primes you to have this very centrally focused attitude. So when all of a sudden you're looking at properties in Inaka or the countryside, it's almost like this, well, that can't be any good because it's so far away from the station. And so it's funny, by living here so long, I think a lot of international people as well are in the same boat as Japanese people, and they just see all of these super cheap properties in the countryside, but they can't get themselves to appreciate the properties because they're so used to judging real estate by the Japanese set of standards. What is it? Japan has decided that the countryside real estate isn't worth anything, so it's almost like this, well, I mean, if it's cheap, it must not be worth anything.
Yeah, it isn't good by definition. It's tautological, right? Because it's not, considered luxury, then it is not luxury. Like, how could it ever become that? There's actually a really interesting, relatively common knee-jerk reaction about Akiya, basically, which is exactly what Parker described. People will be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, it's cheap, but it's like way too much work. Like, why would you ever want that?" And it's like, you don't even know anything about this. You're just making a judgment call based on something that you've convinced yourself of. There's no actual logic behind it.
Yeah. I mean, as you guys are talking about it, and I'm realizing myself that these subconscious thoughts come into mind. Absolutely. And like Parker, you were saying, people who have been here so long are jaded and don't have any point of reference when they hear about a $10,000 property in the countryside, right?
Well, also, it's a layer cake. So, of course, the first layer is that, it can't be good because it's Inaka. But even once you get past that and you start looking at these properties, what Matt was just talking about comes into play because, anybody who has any command of the Japanese language can Google this stuff and look on these databases, and the information is there. But as he just said, 80 to 85% of everything that's on those services is not appealing.
Right.
And even in the descriptions, especially the Akiya banks, so the Akiya banks are actually being managed by the municipal governments. So they're bureaucrats, not real estate agents.
Right.
So actually, in the description for the property, the photos and the kind of, description are basically what's wrong with it. So it's like, don't buy this real estate. It's broken. The bathroom doesn't work. It needs to be renovated completely. By the way, it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's almost masochistic. And I think too, it's also a scarlet letter kind of thing of like, they think that, okay, it's been labeled Akiya, which itself linguistically is problematic because, I mean, even if you just think about it in how it's written in Japanese, it literally means vacant house. House, right? Not vacant business apartment or vacant restaurant or whatever. It means house, which means everybody's thinking about houses, right? There's also a problem with, abandoned versus vacant, right? And other words. And so there's a lot of kind of linguistic baggage that goes along with Akiya.
Well, I think Akiya almost suggests like something bad happened to the people that were there before.
Yeah.
And like they died or they escaped or they stopped paying their rent or they defaulted on their mortgage or...
When frequently enough, it's like down in Kamakura, the owner just built a kick-ass new house and moved into that. Right? What he's got on the market is super great. And it has a dark room for photographers. Ooh. Like, that's insane.
The nice thing about the whole, Akiya and Inaka thing is that, especially if you've ever looked at these houses before, you're almost expecting them to be bad. And so when you actually start to see the good ones, it almost it does the exact opposite to your expectations, and it turns in this sort of depressed sort of, this can't be good, turns into excitement, like, wow, I thought they were all bad, but this one's good.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of excitement right now. Like, Matt, you said your inbox has been blowing up with people who want more information about these houses.
Yeah. It's going really, really well thus far. I've got, I think right now, 6 active conversations about potential work, which is just super encouraging. The market's hot.
And you said another factor for the market being so well is decreased access due to the entry ban. Foreigners can't come into Japan right now due to the entry ban.
Right, which that opens up a much larger conversation about where travel is going to go in the next few months and whatnot. But basically, I'd say a lot of people are sort of they're looking to move, looking to relax, but they can't leave the country, and so they're looking towards Inaka at the moment.
Well, I think that applies to a lot of the long-term residents of Japan who have been living in a metropolitan area like Tokyo or Osaka. And when they did go on vacation, they went overseas. They went to Bali or Thailand or, somewhere outside of Japan. But obviously right now, if they do that, they can't come back in. Right. There is this subset of people who all of a sudden have to look at domestic travel because their international travel ability has been temporarily revoked. And on top of that, there's also, and I think this is not just a foreigner thing, but just in general, if you're in Tokyo during this pandemic, being in the middle of Tokyo is somewhat kind of almost the fear is almost as pandemic as the pandemic itself. And so these small spaces, enclosed spaces, people want to get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting, I'd say almost, kind of sociological point to make is that Tokyo, metropolises, it's not just Tokyo, but coronavirus has, I think the argument for the fact that coronavirus has basically proven that the metropolis model is not as robust as we thought it was. Because literally by living in a metropolis, you are in a dense cluster of people. And if there's an airborne communicable virus, that is the best place to be if you want to get it, right? The best place to be if you want to not get it is in a remote region that just doesn't have many people. That's what Inaka is, right? And so it's not, of course, there's sort of the glamour factor and having a besso or a vacation house or whatever. That still is in play, certainly. But on top of that now, as Parker kind of said, I'm not sure. I mean, fear is definitely the word to describe it, but there's a legitimate health concern, a life and death, element to living in Tokyo versus not Tokyo, somewhere that's not metropolitan. And so I think that this is actually a very, very big driving factor behind the interest in Akiya at the moment.
Guys, I gotta say, my entire time in Japan, I've been in the city. And me and my girlfriend are really, really keen to look out into Inaka to maybe get...
You're talking to the right people.
Well, and, it fixes more problems than you even think because, you're in the city, you're afraid of the infection risk. And, you can't go out to the gym because that's also a hotbed for infection. If you're out in the countryside, you don't have this dense area. And you also, because you bought a house where everything is wrong, because it's in Inaka, and so everything is messed up, and it's abandoned.
Yeah.
And there's spooky ghosts.
Yeah.
You have lots of physical labor to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you don't need that gym membership anymore.
I mean, that's what I do every weekend. My friend down towards Hakone, he bought up. This is awesome. He bought up a corporate retreat. I forget the company that owned it, but it became an Akiya. And this was one of the kind of like bad ones. And so kudos to him for like really fixing it up. But it's 3 stories. It sleeps. I actually asked him last night. I thought it slept like 20. Turns out he's hosted 100 people in this thing.
Wow.
Wow.
I mean, I'm talking like futon in the hallway and all that stuff, but like, yeah, he's hosted a lot of people in this place, and they were paying customers too, right? So there's a business, right? So I go down to this place near Hakone most weekends, and so he fixed it up. It's this huge place. He bought it for, I confirmed last night, 2.7 million yen. It's 3 stories. It's hilltop overlooking the ocean near Hakone. We were barbecuing last night on the deck, which is, I don't know, probably like 60 square meters or something.
And it got like a roof balcony too, right?
Yeah. Well, it's got 2 separate, very large balconies, and then it
Wow.
also has 2 verandas, right? They picked it up for $27,000.
Oh my goodness, guys! I might have to talk to you guys after the podcast.
Yeah. But the point is, so that's where I hang out and stay. But he also runs a farm. And a number of months ago, I was just basically going stir crazy in my apartment during lockdown and like, trying to exercise with resistance bands, and that sucks. I was just like, you know what, screw this. Like, I got to get out into the middle of nowhere and just do some farm work.
Right on.
Shovel shit. And so, yeah, like there is an exercise element to living out of the city, right? And you don't even have to pay for it. It's just what humans do,
Yeah. Let me ask. So, is the name of the business called Akiya?
Akiya and Inaka.
Akiya and Inaka.
Yeah.
So, if you were to sum up in just like a couple sentences exactly what the business does.
So there's a number of elements, right? There's the data side, which is sort of step 1, is that the first hurdle of all of this is that it's really, really difficult to even start looking. And so step 1 is that we integrate with potential clients, paying clients. And the first thing we do is just get a set of search parameters.
Gotcha.
Right. And using those, it's very manual work at the moment, but we basically dig through a bunch of separate listings and find ones that we think are probably reasonably in their, like, something that they would be interested in. So that's step 1. Step 2 is actually getting people out to view the property, which right now, given it's Corona, right, there's some logistical kind of hurdles there if you want to travel safely, right? Because you might not be able to, you're probably not going to be able to stay in the place as you're viewing it, right? So you need a hotel. What does a safe hotel look like? How do you find one in these places, right? Also, what does travel look like? You're probably not going to want to be on a train, right? And if you don't have a car, how do you get out there? And so we have travel services, accommodation and transportation services that allow customer or clients to go out and actually kick the tires of this property that they're looking for. We also have the ability to broker the actual purchase of the property. So even if we didn't have that, it's still a viable business model because you can still say, okay, you've made a decision. Now you got to go talk to them and whatever. But we actually have that in-house.
Ooh, nice.
So then we can basically run defense so that the client doesn't have to deal with all the bureaucratic bullshit that can, not always, but can occur when making transactions such as this. And then we also, we even have community, like I don't know what to call it yet, but kind of community building, not services, but basically like a fan club. Because another thing that's problematic, or maybe not problematic, but something that a lot of people don't think about when thinking about moving to the sticks is city life is a lot different than rural life. And if you don't consider this and if you don't kind of acclimatize yourself to that, you're going to get whiplash by moving out there so quickly and without doing any research. And so if you have a support group, if you have a support system, if you can commiserate with other people who have done something similar, if you just, you got a problem and don't know how to contact the super, like we can provide that as well. And so really it's a full stack relocation kind of service, specifically with regards to vacant properties in rural areas.
On the support network point, I think a lot of foreign nationals in Japan, they might want to have a second home or a country house and romanticize about it, but it's almost a situation of, obviously, we know that it's legal for foreign nationals to buy property wherever, but it's almost like is it okay for a gaijin to buy a property in some random inaka? I mean, are they going to come with, torches and pitchforks and kick us out? I mean, there's really that sort of, one, am I going to be accepted in whatever, new rural community that I choose to buy a property in? And also, obviously, when I run into problems or need to do renovation work or want to kind of explore that local community, how do I get started?
Yeah, I think you guys are hitting all the big subconscious blockers that go through people's minds when they think about these properties. I mean, the social acceptance is a big one.
Well, and I mean, that's actually a point too, is that some communities, right, either they really don't want anybody moving there, and if that's the case, totally fine if they want to do that. Obviously, we won't work with them, but hey, that's okay, right? We want to work with properties that want to be worked with,
right?
So if you don't want to do that thing, okay, cool, like good luck. And two, like there are kind of like Luddite communities out there too that don't want Wi-Fi networks and things like that.
Oh wow.
yeah, they exist. And so again, that's the kind of place that, if you want to do that, great. I don't think it's going to work out very well for you, but whatever. And we just won't bother looking at properties there, right? We want to find a good place for somebody to live, which is another point to make, actually. The flipping element is not part of this. Most, if not all of these communities, there's a reason they're called communities. They like community, right? They're looking for residents. They're not looking for investors.
Right.
And so that's also a big issue with the whole free houses or the cheap houses thing, is that a lot of these rural communities are almost outright saying, do not flip this house, which is sort of a catch-22, because obviously from a market economy perspective, you almost want people to come in and repurpose these houses and spiff them up so that people who are less gung-ho about this sort of thing will come in and kind of take it as a turnkey situation. But really that's not happening, and a major reason why that's not happening is this serious discouragement from the local governments.
I have a couple friends that have properties in Karuizawa, and this one guy, he has a server farm in Karuizawa, and Karuizawa has these pockets that are like known for having insane internet speeds and Wi-Fi. Do you guys know of any locations that are like this, that have like really good, because I'm completely remote.
That's another really interesting point too, right? With remote work, is that there's many interesting points about that. So the first one I would say is that a lot of these properties, number one, keep in mind they're not all houses. Some of them are business and office spaces.
Gotcha.
Right? Another thing is that they tend to kind of occur near each other. And I remember one of the first sort of like, oh, that's a wacky way to think about it sort of thing that I had with regards to this was that to me looked like a corporate campus. Right? And so now during coronavirus too, you've got Fujitsu, for example, 80,000 employees, and they just made a statement. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like 50% or so of their staff. I don't know how they're going to do it, but basically they're talking about like permanent remote work, I think. And then also, it's not just remote work, it's that they want to develop regional like office spaces, right? So that it's not just, oh yeah, we're still based in Tokyo, we're just doing remote work. It's that they're dispersing. Right. Now, I suspect Fujitsu being a huge Japanese company, they probably have resources to figure out how to do this. I would also expect that those resources are going to tell them to build, which is a cost. right? However, and I seriously doubt we'd ever get involved with Fujitsu because, like, who are we? And they're a huge company and whatnot. But if they were really smart, they would do what we're doing and look for those centers, right, of abandoned buildings and just retrofit them, right? They could save a lot of money. I don't know how much, but I mean, building completely new structures versus just throwing a Wi-Fi, sweeping and throwing a Wi-Fi network into, a house or whatever, or office space that's abandoned that you can pick up for 600,000 yen. Like, that seems like a pretty good idea.
Well, so actually, there have been instances of this, and usually the large companies go for abandoned or unused municipal buildings.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yeah, and so I've seen Fuji Xerox actually did a long-term lease on a former junior high school in Tono, actually.
Oh, wow.
And so that was actually very successful, but the issue with that is, I guess it's a deal of the more infrastructure the building has, the more it costs to maintain. So obviously, if you've got a schools in Japan are built to ridiculously high standards for earthquake preparedness, and they have certain features, and obviously they're of a certain size, so they've got all of this lighting and HVAC equipment. And so the upkeep, running cost of these buildings, these structures, is also very high.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is it costs a lot of money for the local government to maintain, but they have it budgeted for, so it's no skin off of their nose. But when they rent it to a private industry, the actual revenue from the rental is very cheap. And so the municipality doesn't make that much money on renting it to the private sector, but the private sector, the cost of maintaining such a large former municipal structure is so high that from a private sector perspective, it's almost as expensive to run one of these former schools as it is to build a purpose-built structure. And so there's a problem when you're talking about scale, but of course, depending on the type of structure and the size, the upkeep cost changes.
Well, and that's something that I can't help but think is just super neat, is that you've got, it's almost like you're starting to deconstruct definitions. It's like, usually when you look at something and you call it a school, you can kind of understand what its function is, right? But, and granted, schools aren't maybe the best example, but if something is a house, right, but Fujitsu buys it up and turns it into a remote working space, suddenly it's an office, but it's a house. Like, what is it? And you kind of end up blurring the lines of what things are.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Definitely piqued my interest. I'm
Good.
Gonna go home and start researching Akiya.
No. Let us do that for you.
Sounds like a plan. Yeah, and so we didn't have enough time today, but Matt, you're also a huge music guy.
Yeah, I'm a booker and a performer. I play in bands and do just everything in the scene.
And you have your own record label, right?
Yeah, Kala Records.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're definitely going to have you on again. I want to talk about music. I want to talk about your label, events.
Awesome, yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome.
My two passions in life, right? Extreme metal and abandoned buildings. Ah!
Ooh. Hey, listeners, that's right. You listener right there.
Who do you think should be our next guest on Tokyo Wave? Let us know. Drop us a line at wave@tokyowave.jp.
We hope you enjoyed Tokyo Wave.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Join us again next week on Tokyo Wave.